The wood that I'm using for this is hickory, and it's actually wallboard, or that's how it's sold anyway. But I want to use it on a floor. I could have done this the easy way by just using the boards as they are, but I decided that I wanted to make it a little bit more interesting with a fancy border, and part of that is to have some of the boards darker. So I picked out the right color stain, and here I'm pre-staining some of the boards, and this will give them time to dry while I work on other parts of the floor. I wanted to make fancy corners for the border as well, and that's what I'm doing here. These are made up of shorter pieces with a block of walnut in the middle. I need 4 of these, 1 for each corner of the room, and I started by cutting all the parts to the right length. And these ones are angled on both ends to get the right length. I just drew a line right on the bed of my miter saw to line the edge up with before I make the cut. And these boards are tongue and groove, so where I make a straight cut, I need to make either a tongue or a groove. It's usually easier to make a groove, and I need to do that on all 4 sides of that walnut block that goes in the middle, and on the ends of the pieces that fit together that go around the outside. And I'm doing that on my table saw in 2 cuts to get the right thickness. These boards also have a very slight bevel on the edge where they fit together, so I want to get that on the parts that I made as well, so that it won't have any sharp corners and it'll match. And for the most part, I'm just going to do that with sanding. And with that done, I can do a dry fit to make sure that it's all going together without any gaps. And then I can get them glued together just on the outside though. The inner pieces are just locked together with the tongue and groove joints. With that done, I set them aside to dry, and I went down to my room, and the first thing I need to do is improve the lighting in here. I've got these fixtures that look good, but they don't give off a lot of light, so I'm just going to take them apart and put a regular LED bulb in there so that I'll brighten up the room so I'll be able to see what I'm doing. Now that I can see what I'm doing, I can move out some of the things that'll be in my way. Because I decided to have a border, that's exactly where I'll need to start. Also, I need to do a little bit of prep work to run speaker wires over to the side walls. The walls of the room are removable panels made from plywood that are just screwed in place. I can get those taken off where I need to, and it's possible to run the wire behind those to reach the front of the room, but it's a lot easier to run it on the floor, just cutting a slot through the carpet. Now at this point you might be saying, what about that carpet? Why are you cutting a slot through that? Aren't you taking that up? And actually no, I'm going to lay the hardwood floor on top of that carpet, and it'll kind of act as padding. But I will say with the benefit of hindsight that if I had to do it over again, I would have taken up this carpet completely. It seemed like a good idea to have this padding underneath to begin with, but in the end it has too much give even though it's very thin. Next, I got my miter saw brought down and set up. The idea with the blanket is to catch the dust. That kind of worked and it kind of didn't. But here I'm cutting the first piece that I need to lay, and it's in the doorway that leads to another room. I'm going to be gluing these boards down to the carpet and also using nails where I need to hold them. And here's one of those corners that I made, and this is just getting glued down. And this is probably my first mistake. I really shouldn't have put this right in the corner like this. Instead, I should have ran a couple boards in to create a border around this. And then it would have looked better, I think. With the corner put in, I can start building the border. Those are the boards that I stained in the beginning. And these will wrap around that corner. And you can see here I'm putting a spline in that acts as a tongue that the next board will fit into. And I decided to miter the boards that wrap around the corner, at least the first row. And the most accurate way to mark the length of these is to put the piece in place, mark it, and then cut it. And once again, that gets glued down and I can do the next one as well. And here I have to stop working on that corner and move to another corner and build that before I can go any further. The rows of boards that make up the border overlap, so you have to make that continuous. This is the same as the corner I started with, where I have a doorway that I'll need to put a starter piece in. Get that glued down, and then I can get the corner slid in, but this time I need to scribe it to fit tighter to the wall. I quickly planed that to fit, and then I glued that in as well. While you're watching me do this, I'm going to talk briefly about the room. This is what I call my listening room, but it's where I watch movies, TV shows, and also read, as well as listening to music. So I spent a lot of time here, and I wanted it to look good and be comfortable. Now, as you can see, it already had carpet on here, and I put that down immediately after I finished the room as kind of a in-between step. I knew I was going to eventually put hardwood down, but I didn't realize it was going to be this soon. Fact is, I got a pretty good deal on this wood, and I jumped on it, and rather than having it sit around for months, I decided to get the floor done immediately. I should also mention that this room doesn't have any internet. I leave my phone upstairs, and because of all the soundproofing and room treatment I've done, I might not even hear if someone's breaking down my front door, let alone knocking on it. So I'm completely cut off, disconnected, and able to relax here, which is what I really appreciate now that I'm older. You might be thinking that, wouldn't the room be better off with carpet in there rather than hardwood floor? Given that it's kind of a home theater, I mean, you're listening to music in there, wouldn't the carpet be a better choice? And actually, no, and I did a before and after measurement, and I posted that on my other channel, and an explanation on why the hardwood is better, especially in an acoustically treated room like this one. While I was talking about that, I moved on to corner number 3, same as corner number 2 and corner number 1, except there's no doorway. And doing this is time consuming. You have to fit each piece and make recuts to get the right fit. Although I'm not looking for anything perfect here, one of the reasons for doing a floor like I'm doing here is to end up with shorter pieces going in different directions so that expansion and contraction will be less of an issue. And that's especially important in a humid location like the typical basement where this room is. But that does add a lot of work. Every one of these pieces that has a groove on the end, I had to bring out to my workshop and cut on the table saw. When I finish with most of the border, I could start filling in the field. And the way I'm doing that is to almost build another border inside that stained border that fills in between the bump outs with straight runs. And you might notice that I'm using wider boards here. That's because I have 2 widths. I originally bought 4-inch ones, and those are the ones that I'm laying right now. But I wasn't sure that I would have enough, so I bought up all the 3-inch ones that they had as well. And then I was sure that I had enough. Now I'm switching back to a 3-inch one that's mitered in the corner, and that'll frame the square that's in the center of the room. With the border done, I figured it would be a good idea to wipe on the first coat of oil and let that dry while I cut the parts that will go in the middle of the floor. So what I'm going to make is 9 squares inside that square that are 3 feet square. And this is like a large parquet pattern where the boards go in one direction in one square and in the opposite direction in the next one, kind of like a big checkerboard. After I got the boards cut, I sanded them all, and I also wiped on the first coat of oil and let that dry. And that way the entire floor will have the first coat of oil when I lay the last board. And to make these so that they'll fit together, I had to cut a groove on each end. Once again, doing that on my table saw in 2 passes. Installing the rest of the floor is pretty straightforward. Like I said before, what I was left with here was a 9-foot by 9-foot space, and these squares are 3 by 3, so I just did them one at a time. Now there are a couple of places where I have wires coming through the floor. In particular, near the middle, I have a USB cable that comes through. And also I've got another speaker wire that's coming through underneath the chair for the bass shaker that's attached to my chair. Bit of a puzzle putting in the last square, and I have to admit that at this point I was glad that it was the last square. This took a long time and was a lot of work, but I really like the way it turned out. So here's the before and here's the after. As you can see, I painted the walls as well, and you would think that the opposite would be true, but the room actually looks bigger with these dark walls, especially with that dim lighting I have.